Coming up this hour, we have a couple of fantastic sessions right here in the main feed. We have victimless crimes. What are they? Why do they exist? Should they exist? All that and more will be discussed right here in the main feed. But if you're a paying ticket holder, you can scroll down the page a little bit and have a look at the breakout session, which is Reclaiming Liberalism. And if that's something that piques your interest and you're a paid up attendee of the conference, then you're able to get access to that. We'd encourage you to jump in there if that sounds like your kind of thing. But I'm going to hand over to Sydney. They're taking care of our wonderful guests and this incredibly interesting session. I think it's going to be fascinating on victimless crimes.
You guys are doing a great job down there in Melbourne as well. Appreciate it. And as you say, thanks to all the speakers, we generally, as a rule, try to and mostly succeed to avoid paying our speakers, which means they're here for the love of it. So we really appreciate that. We are now jumping into the session on victimless crimes. This is, I think, this is going to be one of my favorites, I think. This is always one every year that stands out. And I've been really looking forward to this one. So let's just jump in. Because these first two speakers are mostly telling you their life story, I don't want to introduce them by telling their life story. I'll be taking their story away. So I'll just say Jason Spires spent, I believe, 15 years in jail for weed-related offences. A great example of a victimless crime. And he's come to share his story with us today. Thank you, Jason.
Hi. First off, thank you for inviting me to speak. I love being a part of this, and I try to tell people I like to share my story because people, when they hear my story, say, wow, I can't believe that happened. And I try to tell them there's nothing special about me. There's tons of me just like me still in prison that you never hear about. You're going to hear from one of them, his mother anyways, right after me. So let me tell you something. I want to get the hashtag make cannabis not matter be relevant. And here's what I mean by that. My name is Jason Spires, and I was given a 30-year sentence for selling cannabis at the age of 19. These are nonviolent cannabis offenses. I was also given over $200,000 in fines, which was turned into debt collections, destroying my credit. But on top of all of that, when I got sentenced to more years than I had been alive, I didn't pay attention to the other things the judges were saying. And I got this thing called a Class X sentence. Now, what a Class X sentence is in the state that I was in America, which is Illinois, is it deemed you legally heinous and legally unrehabilitatable. So a nonviolent cannabis offense ended up deeming me legally heinous and legally unrehabilitatable and made me serve almost 15 years in prison. Fortunately, when I was in there, a tree fell and it didn't hit me, but it came close. And I had this realization that I could have died. And I realized that I wanted to do something better with my life because I was like, what's my legacy? If I would have died today, what's my legacy? And it would have been that I was good. And I say quotes good because I got caught. So I obviously wasn't all that good. But that I was good at moving a plant from this state to that state. And I was like, I don't think that's the kind of legacy that I wanted to live for myself. So I said, I need to improve my education. And so what I did is I went over to the prison library and I got an organic chemistry book. And I started reading it. And I remember it was 1,200 pages. And it had an 1,100-page workbook. And I did every single question on every single page, every single day for 6 months until I got it done. After that, I did physics, then came calculus, then came organic chemistry. I spent years preparing myself because I knew when I got out that I wanted to go back to college and I knew I'd have to work to support myself while I did it. So, fortunately, the last year of my sentence, I was let into a work release program. This is where I was allowed to leave to get out and get a job. I was still in prison. I still had to ask their permission to use the restroom, but I was allowed to leave and get a job and do productive things in society as long as I came back and was sober at the end of the day. And about 3 months into it, I asked my counselor, what's up with college? College is a productive thing. You should let me go to college. And he's like, all right, we'll let you go to college. 3 months later, I'm in full-time engineering courses, holding a 4.0 GPA. I'm working 70 hours a week. The job that I was at, I became the operations manager, and we've expanded it to another location. And my only mode of transportation was a bike and my 2 feet. I slept about 4 to 6 hours a night, and many times it was on the couches in the student lounge in between classes because I did whatever it takes to make things happen. Fortunately, when I paroled, I was the operations manager of a business, so I was now in a position to be able to hire other inmates that were in the work release center, and I was able to identify nonviolent offenders like myself and pay forward that second chance, just like I was given. And it gave me so much joy. So when I finished, I said, you know what? I got all these good grades in a community college, and I want to set a great example for everybody. And I said, you know what? I'm going to apply to all those big names. I'm going to apply to Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, all those big name universities that when you get into them, for some reason, our society thinks you're now important and it matters and assigns way too much significance to you for no reason whatsoever at all. So I applied. And one thing I like to say is I was very fortunate because I think the admissions committee at Stanford drank one too many wine coolers when they were reading my application, and they checked the wrong box and accepted me. I'm glad they drank a lot of wine coolers, I guess. But so now here I am, and I'm at Stanford University, and I'm studying artificial intelligence. Now, I want you to think about this, because when I got into Stanford, all of a sudden I had U.S. Representative Sherry Bustos wanting to meet me. I had the local sheriff of my town wanting to get a hold of me and integrate a program with me. And what I found so funny is I went from one day being this legally heinous, legally unrehabilitatable felon who spent almost all of his entire adult life in prison to you wouldn't even let him in your office to now, hey, let's call that guy out and take him out to lunch and celebrate because he got into Stanford. So the next phone call I got was from the Illinois Department of Corrections, the place that incarcerated me. And they said, Jason, we think it's great that you got into Stanford. We'd like to use you as an example. Would you be willing to shoot a commercial for us? And I thought, sure, because I figured out right away they wanted to use my face to talk about how good their programs were and make it sound like their work release center is what got me to Stanford. And I was all for it, because if I can convince people that that is possible and they're willing to support a work release program to let other people seek out their own goals that are nonviolent offenders that shouldn't be in prison anyways, not even nonviolent, just victimless offenders, I was all for it. But when I went down there and filmed the commercial, one of my old counselors said, hey, Jason, we got these two programmers from Microsoft, and they're trying to design an algorithm to identify more people like you that could actually use these spots in work release and GED classrooms so we can maximize the efficiency of what we got. And I was like, man, good deal. And they're like, we would like to study you a little bit to help make an algorithm for that. I'm like, great. I'm helping people. I love it. So, but now I'm at Stanford and I started studying artificial intelligence and I realized what happened. In the last 2 years at Stanford, I've been studying what's known as AI, it's artificial intelligence, and I call it rocking back and forth in a closet sniveling, doubting your own intelligence, because, man, it's hard. It gets them out there stuff. But artificial intelligence is the future, and it ties into cannabis in ways we do not expect. If you have not heard of Compass, you need to check it out. Right now in America, 49 of 50 states are moving over to their bail systems where they assess people for bail based upon an algorithmic system that will predict if you're a harm to society or a danger to the community. And actually, based off the data sets it's given and the AI algorithms it's using, it's doing just about as good as the judges did beforehand. But here's where it gets scary. In language processing, you can see how AI has biasness. And you're like, how can an artificial intelligence be biased? Ain't it just a computer code? Well, what happened was when they were developing Google Translate, there's certain languages that have gender neutral pronouns. Like in English, I might say, he is over there, or she is behind me. But I will say, they stand over there. And they, you don't know if they're male or female. You figure it out off the context. And other languages have similar pronouns for the third person. And we've discovered that the artificial intelligence will try to determine the gender of the pronoun off of the context. So for instance, if you use the word engineer or doctor, it'll think you're talking about a he, and it'll translate he is a doctor. But if you're talking about a nurse or a counselor, it'll translate as she and be like, she is a doctor, right? She is a nurse, or she is a counselor. And now this all ties in. About a month ago, a man named George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in America. I watched a video where an officer stood on his neck as he cried out for his mother with his last breath. It sickened me. Now, I'm not here to get all political about that event, but what sickened me even worse was the response. Certain people, like Candace Owens, brought up his past, brought up how he was a criminal who did these bad things, and mentioned these other things that if I use AI words, classifiers or distinguishing characteristics. And I started to think about my life. If that would have been me, and that cop was standing on my neck as I begged for my mother, what the news could say was he was a legally heinous criminal. He was legally unrehabilitatable. He spent almost his entire adult life in prison, and he had over $250,000 in fines and didn't even pay him. Now, none of you probably look at me and think I'm a horrible person because you all know it's about cannabis. And you have a human intelligence. And you're able to look at that and go, well, he might have been legally heinous, but he wasn't really heinous. That was a flaw in the law. And he might have been legally unrehabilitatable, but he got out and he went to Stanford and he hasn't been arrested for nothing since. So clearly he's rehabilitatable. Our human brains can decipher characteristics that algorithms will never catch because we have ingrained biasness in ourselves. And when we design algorithms, they reveal that what we subconsciously don't interpret actually does not live up to our morality.
Absolutely.
What's important here is when I was at Stanford and people found out it's cannabis, they say, oh, it's just cannabis. But an algorithm will never say it's just cannabis because to an algorithm, it'll check a box. Was he a heinous offender? Was he not a heinous offender? Was he legally unrehabilitatable? Was he not legally unrehabilitatable? And then we're going to have the Compass algorithms and other AI technologies building models and making predictions, which we know are not accurate because our biasness didn't live up to our morality. Let me give you an example of what a Class X crime is. In Illinois, I got listed some Class X crimes that I was listed with. Aggravated armed robbery, aggravated criminal sexual assault, dismembering a human body. What person in their right mind would think selling cannabis as a teenager classifies you the same category as dismembering of a human body? No human would think that. But our artificial intelligence algorithms will. So, I came here today to say that we need to make cannabis convictions not matter. And what I mean by that is we need to remove all traces of cannabis convictions in a person's past from any algorithm that can be designed to build models that will make predictions, be this in criminal justice reform, be this in economic policy, be this in job incentives. We need to make cannabis not matter. Because if anybody is honest about it, when you look into the history of cannabis, whether you're for it or against it, if you objectively look at it, you will realize, at least in the United States, it became illegal off of racist motivations and political opportunities. I got whole videos. Go to Facebook, 30 years for cannabis. I've done whole videos on it. But if we want to move forward, AI is the future. And unless we clean our data set, remove the data points that make no sense to build our models and do accurate predictions, we're going to do nothing but be doomed to not living up to our morality. My name is Jason Spires. Thank you very much. You can get a hold of me at 30 Years for Cannabis. That's 30 Years for Cannabis on Facebook. And my email is jasonspires@gmail.com. Thank you for having me today, and I hope you guys enjoy the next speakers.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for jumping on this stream. We really appreciate your commentary. And I think just, on the issue of George Floyd, Jason raised a good point, which is people use previous criminal convictions to really dehumanize something when truly awful things happen. We're now going to go to our next speaker, who is Lynn Ulbricht. Now, she's the mother of Ross Ulbricht, who some of you may be aware of, who's a peaceful man who was sentenced to a double life sentence and 40 years in addition without any chance of parole for non-violent charges associated with his role with the Silk Road website. So since Ross's arrest, Lynn has strived to direct awareness to these issues and basically raise awareness on how these cases can impact freedoms in the digital age. So Lynn, if you're ready, we're going to throw over to you and open up to that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And yes, as you said, my son, Ross Ulbricht, is serving a double life sentence plus 40 years with no possibility of parole, essentially a death in prison sentence for all nonviolent charges, and he's a first-time offender. This is for his role in the Silk Road website, which was a free market online platform that he created when he was 26 years old. He's now 36 years old. No victim came forward to say that Ross had harmed them in any way at trial. No victim was named at trial. And yet he gets a far longer sentence than many murderers, kidnappers, terrorists, child traffickers, and other violent people who do create victims. So it's an important topic, victimless crimes. And essentially a victimless crime is by nature consensual. Bad things might happen if you choose voluntarily to take an action, but if you're not forced, and it's a choice, and you're not a victim. And Silk Road, the website that Ross created, was fundamentally consensual. It was based on the non-aggression principle of voluntary interaction, and no force was permitted. And it even went further than that. Besides saying the two people, buyer and seller, were consensual, it said that anything that was sold that created a victim of a third party, that was not permitted on the site. So, for example, there was no child pornography on Silk Road because that child didn't consent that they are a victim of this transaction. No child abuse at all. There was no stolen property. There was no violent services. There were no weapons. There were nothing that could harm another person, even if two of the people involved in the transaction consented. So it even went farther. But as all websites, including Facebook and Craigslist and Amazon, people presumably used items from Silk Road to harm themselves. This has never been actually proven, but it's, probable, like with every website. And, but it certainly was very clearly established that no one was forced to do anything through Silk Road. The thing is, the use of victimless crimes in our criminal justice system has exacted extremely expensive toll in our country, United States. It's first of all made the United States the biggest incarcerator on the planet. This is the land of the free. This is a national disgrace, and it's a human rights offense and violation that is frankly evil. And it also, victimless crimes have made this possible because 86% of the victimless crime, people who are convicted of victimless crime, make up 86% of the prison population, most of them drug offenders. So the other cost is money. It costs taxpayers $40 billion with a B dollars every year to keep these people caged who are not a threat. They have not created victims. They're probably, or many of them, certainly nonviolent. And it actually endangers the rest of us because resources in law enforcement that would go to, pursue violent people or people that are creating victims are used to pursue victimless crimes. People who are involved in victimless crimes, and so it takes away. And the thing is, there's an incentive to do that because well, just put yourself in their shoes. Would you rather pursue somebody who was selling weed or a murderer? I mean, honestly, it's pretty much of a no-brainer that the incentive is to chalk up that notch on your belt, which, as far as their career is concerned, it's the same, going after people who have not created victims. They're not dangerous. But the real human toll here is actually human beings. And it's easy to cite statistics and stuff, but when you actually see and know the human beings involved, that's what really brings it home. And I actually have a picture that I'd like to show. I can't tell if it's being shown or not. Is it? It was supposed to be put up, hopefully. No? Well,
it will have been put up on the live feed. We're not privy to the live feed. We're only privy to the Zoom call that we're
okay.
in right
Well,
now.
I'll refer to it then. Is that okay to refer to it? I'll refer to it because it's a picture that it's a very powerful picture. It's a picture that Ross organized when he was in a maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado. And he was put in there not because of his danger to society. And in fact, his security score put him in a camp. But because of his life sentence that this judge gave him, he was automatically put in a prison that was very gang heavy and very, it was kind of like the place they put their most violent people. It was a step down from Supermax, which was on the same compound. And this picture is of Ross with his fellow prisoners, all of whom are serving life sentences for all nonviolent drug offenses. So at the top left, Ross is on the left kneeling, and then the top left with his hand on Ross's shoulder is Sean. I know Sean, I've met him. I've met his sister and his daughter. He has 5 children, and he is serving life for possessing user amounts of heroin. He's not a dealer. He was a junkie. He had a problem. But because it was his 3rd strike under the Clinton 1994 crime bill, he was automatically given a life sentence. Third from the left is Tony. Tony is serving life and has already put in about 15 years for selling marijuana, or at least an informant said he did. And the prison is in Colorado, where it's legal on a state level. But Tony's in a federal prison, and he's totally nonviolent, and had no victims. He really, I have a soft spot for Tony, besides the injustice of this, because he befriended Ross. Ross was thrown into this environment totally. I mean, he was certainly not prepared to be in a violent prison. And Tony took him under his wing and became a real friend to him. And Ross says he's a great guy, and he certainly doesn't belong in there. I wish I had time to talk about each of them, but on the far right is Jay. I know his wife, I know his daughter. And when the First Step Act was passed, thanks to President Trump, to give him credit for that, the 3rd strike law changed to, okay, you don't get life automatically, you get 25 years, which is still pretty bad, but Jay had served almost 25 years, so they were jumping for joy that maybe they could become a family again. And then it turned out that, oh wait, it wasn't retroactive. And this was political pushback, and the only way to get it passed was to agree. And so it's like saying, well, slavery is wrong, so we're going to abolish it. But oh wait, you're still a slave? Well, so sorry, it's not retroactive. You have to stay a slave. It's unbelievable. It's insane. So, and then below him, his hand's on Jose. I've met Jose. I've met his sister, because we all meet in the visiting room. And Jose is sweet guy, Christian guy who helps people in there all the time. Ross says he's one of the sweetest people he's ever met. He's in there. His 3rd strike is residue on a dollar bill. The man is serving a life sentence for having a dollar bill that happened to have had residue on it. I could have that in my wallet right now. So, and then there's a fellow in the middle who's a nonviolent drug offender. He's in a wheelchair. And then there's Ross, who's like the poster boy for excessive sentencing and victimless crimes. Now, these people, it's not just them. It's their families who are suffering. And I can attest to that personally. Our family has been under incredible, it's been awful. It's been terrible and very destructive to our family. And that's true of so many people. It's like if your loved one is in prison, you are serving time along with them. Your life is being taken also. And the children is what's really hard to see. They come in, they're so excited to see their dad. They're climbing in his lap, they're hugging him, they're, all of this, they're so excited. And then they're torn away once again, and they leave shattered. They're crying and sobbing, and, they're being harmed. And one mom told me, she said, my kids had straight A's until this happened, and now everything's just falling apart in our family. And there's 3 million of these children who have an incarcerated parent in the United States, and they are statistically liable to end up in prison themselves. It's like a horrible machine that devours people. It's a terrible thing. The criminal justice system in the United States has been weaponized against people. And the thing is, it hasn't always been that way. Since the drug war, the prison population has metastasized 800%, a great deal to do with victimless crimes. And life sentences, like what Ross has, have quintupled since then. Actually, over 17,000 nonviolent people are serving life in the United States right now, according to the Sentencing Project. If the prison population were a state, it would have a population larger than 11 states in the United States. It's like its own state. It's like the state of incarceration. It's becoming like this monster. And so I just want to say, to wrap this up, I know everyone here is here because they care about freedom. This is a fundamental freedom issue, because what is more basic than being locked in a metal box, 8 by 10? What is more basic to your liberty being removed and taken away and shredded than that? And actually, since COVID, Ross has been either 22 hours a day or now 24 hours a day in a metal box, fed through a slot in the door. And this is a freedom issue. And it's important. It's an important thing that I feel like when it's happening to these people so unjustly, none of us are truly free. So thank you for this opportunity to say that and to reach out to you all. Please go to freeross.org, which is our hub. You can reach me easily. There's a petition that has a big red banner on our homepage to sign, goes right to the petition. We're the largest clemency petition addressed to President Trump on change.org. We have almost 340,000 signers. We are asking him, please correct this draconian sentence. And that will help others because it creates a precedent right now for excessive sentencing. And Ross, when he gets out, and I always say when, is going to work to reform this, as will I. So please help us. Please go to freeross.org. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That is some powerful stuff. And it really also highlights the importance of the personal stories. A lot of us are well acquainted with the theoretical arguments, but I think the personal stories really help us to feel the consequences of bad laws, not just to know about them hypothetically. So thank you very much for that. The next speaker we have up is one of our favorites in Australia. We've had her over a few different times, and we're very happy to have her back, and hopefully we'll keep dragging her back to Australia for as long as she's willing to come. Please stay tuned for Arvins O'Brien.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Australia. I've really enjoyed every time that I've been to Australia. I'm actually really disappointed because I'm speaking at the Friedman conference and I get no koala. Like, this is a problem. I had to lighten the mood. Wow, Jason and Lynn's stories just like break my heart, and I want to talk about that. Because the topic of victimless crimes ties into so much about the libertarian perspective on the world in general. In order for there to be a crime, there must be a victim. And unfortunately, governments all over the world have decided to create one. a victimless crime in court identifies the state as the victim. Here in the US, just a few decades ago, if you married a partner of a different race, apparently the state was a victim. Less than a decade ago, if you married a partner of the same gender, the state was a victim. To this day, now, when you take drugs, apparently the state is a victim. When you sell drugs, apparently the state is a victim. In states where it's legal, if you fail to procure the correct licenses to either ingest or sell certain drugs, apparently the state is a victim. And when you sell sexual use of your body for money, apparently the state is a victim. When your children sell lemonade without a permit in certain areas of the US, the state is a victim. When you braid your neighbor's hair for a mutually agreed upon price but fail to get a license, apparently the state is a victim. When you commit mild regulatory infractions of any variety, apparently the state is a victim. But here's the ironic thing. The state is not a victim. The state is not a person, and it does not have rights. It creates a victim, though, because the people who are being stopped, who are being frisked, who are being fined, who are being detained, who are being brutalized, beaten, imprisoned in a cage, these are the real victims. Jason is a real victim. Ross Ulbricht is a real victim. Lynn is a real victim for having to see her son going through this. These are the ones that have been victimized by the state. In 2014, Eric Garner was murdered by a cop in New York City for selling Lucy's, which are cigarettes sold individually without tax. He died repeating the phrase, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." I watch that video sometimes, it just like breaks my heart, and I just watch it just like, oh my God, it's such a terrible thing to watch. Just a few months ago, George Floyd was murdered by a cop in Minneapolis for the suspicion of using a counterfeit bill, a counterfeit $20 bill. Now, first, I'd like to point out that we don't even know if he knew it was counterfeit. Money gets exchanged. Sometimes people have no idea that they're handling a counterfeit bill. But the second thing is it's $20. It was literally $20, and this man died over it. Now, counterfeit currency actually does have a victim, because if somebody is expecting money for something and they don't get it, obviously that's a victim because they haven't earned what they were expected to receive. However, there was no trial, there was no jury. A cop kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as he begged for his life, begged for his mother, and repeated the phrase, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe." I'm wearing a shirt right now, hold on, with those words on it, in memory of Eric Garner, of George Floyd, of Justine Damond, of Duncan Lemp, of Philando Castile, of Kelly Thomas, and countless other victims of police brutality. And not just brutality, in those cases, of actual murder. So many innocent people have been killed by police in the US for completely victimless crimes, for regulatory infractions, for drug possession, for consensual sexual activity, and so many other things. The police in the US have been empowered by terrible laws such as qualified immunity, civil asset forfeiture, and prosecutors who refuse to work to indict them. Many more lives have been destroyed by having criminal records, by spending years in prison, like Jason or like Ross, being sentenced to life in prison. A brilliant young man, like Ross is amazing, and he's locked in a cage potentially for the rest of his life. His only victim was the state. As Lynn mentioned, actually, in her speech, I totally just added this to mine, is the prison industrial complex in the US is a human rights violation. As she said, 86% of the people in US prisons are there for victimless crimes. Individuals, families, and countless people's lives are destroyed, not because of victimless crimes, but because of the state's insistence on prosecuting them. Now, what's interesting is there's actually select areas of the country that are trying out different ways of dealing with some victimless crimes, not all victimless crimes, obviously, but I believe one of the areas that's doing this is Boulder, Colorado. Boulder, Colorado started doing a way of restorative justice instead of this punitive justice. So for certain kinds of victimless crimes, they look at things like doing community service and things like that instead of prison time, instead of jail time. This is something that could potentially be used to lessen the effects of, I'd say, both police brutality and also just the effect of how these things ruin people's lives. Additionally, the Libertarian Party here in the U.S. Now, I am actually in Orlando at the Libertarian National Convention, and we just we nominated last month. We nominated our candidates for president and vice president. Joe Jorgensen, who I believe is going to be interviewed later in this 24-hour digital conference of freedom, but also Spike Cohen is her vice presidential candidate, and the two of them are running on a campaign that includes ending all federal laws regarding victimless crimes and pardoning all prior offenders of victimless crimes. This would do wonders to reduce police brutality, to reduce the massive financial costs of trying and imprisoning these people, and the human cost of these completely ridiculous crimes. There are so many solutions that we can use to stop destroying lives, and the only victims of victimless crimes are those being victimized by the state. My speech is way too short. I have all this extra time now, but this is, but really that's what I had to say and what I wanted to wrap into Jason and Lynn. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Arvins. Really appreciate it. We do have a bit of time for Q&A this time around. The most common question coming in, I'm going to paraphrase it because we've got it in a few different varieties, but it's some sort of version of, we love to open these conferences up to anyone to listen to. We love to invite people who disagree with us a bit. So we're very pleased to see that a bunch of communists are listening in and submitting questions. And the theme here is they want me to push back on the idea of victimless, whether these are victimless crimes. I think the suggestion is that the victim might be the person themselves, or that the victim is the society, their parents, the people around them, that they might suffer from, I guess they're specifically talking drugs here. So I guess I put that back to you as a devil's advocate, worded in a cheeky way. How would you respond to people who are arguing that there are victims to drug use, the person themselves or the people around them or the community?
Well, the argument I like to make with that is if you want to argue that it's not a victimless crime because the person destroyed their own lives, then skydiving should definitely be illegal. And bungee jumping should be illegal. And I can think of a million things that aren't good for us. Red meat kills way more people than drugs do, at least in the United States. As for people's family and the way they feel when they're impacted when their family uses drugs, that goes to being a health issue, right? We need to address addiction and handle the addiction aspects, because when we make an illegal market, all you're doing is making a bad situation worse. Let me give you a good example. When I was selling drugs, I was in high school and I was selling pot. When I turned 18, I wanted to throw a party. And so I invited everybody and I was going to have weed for everybody. And they said, cool, can we get beer? And I spent 2 days as a drug dealer in town trying to get a keg of beer and could not do it. I did not do it. But if I wanted to buy a couple ounces of meth, I could have called a guy and had it in 15 minutes. When you make a product illegal, you are not stopping victims from getting created. What you're doing is you're removing people who have morals, who are going to come in and handle it like a business and not kill you because you didn't give them $500. And you're going to take it to the people who have no respect for the law. One of the arguments that I make is that I am the first to admit that I broke the law. And I am the first to admit that even though you can say cannabis should be legal or not illegal, but I will tell you that I broke the law, and that in and of itself deserves some form of a consequence. But what happens is is when you have an illegal market, all you're doing is creating a prohibition, and you're pushing it to people who will not have good morals and who could care less if their business license will get revoked for bad action. When an underage person rocks into a bar and buys a drink, that bartender is scared. When that same underage person calls their drug dealer, they're thinking of the money they're going to make. There are other people who get affected, but you're arguing this is a bad situation. We're arguing, yes, it's a bad situation, but let's not make it worse. And that would be my answer to that.
No, that is an excellent point. And you often hear the what about the children claim. And one response I've given to that in the past is, when your child grows up, I guarantee you someone will be there to sell them drugs. Do you want it to be a dodgy back alley person, or do you want it to be a registered business that has their reputation to worry about? There's no option of...
I want to know, has Anheuser-Busch ever drove by Michelob and shot off a rocket launcher at them? Because if you go down to downtown Chicago, you're going to see two rival businesses shooting at each other because we have prohibition on the drug market. You don't see that in the alcohol market.
Not anymore. Arvins and Lynn,
I think I'd like to say something too.
Yeah, Lynn,
the drug war has been going on for over 45 years. It's America's longest war, and it's cost untold billions of dollars. And I think people are still using drugs. Frankly, it just doesn't work. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's fundamental that a victimless crime doesn't use force. It's consent. It's something someone voluntarily takes part in. And should the state decide what you should do with your own body and with your own choices if it doesn't hurt someone else? And I just want to underline what Avin said, because when Ross's case is called the U.S. versus Ulbricht, no victim except the state. She's absolutely right. So no, we can't legislate keeping people from harm. It's just not going to happen. But, it's victimless in the sense that no one was forced into anything. No one, it was all voluntary. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not all for drugs, all that stuff. That's a different discussion. But it doesn't work is the other thing. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think just on that last point, people seem to think that if you're saying that we should, try and get rid of some of these victimless crimes, that you're tacitly endorsing anything that's associated with that, which isn't the case. Now, but as we talk right now, sorry, Arvins, I think you had something you wanted to add?
I did. I mean, besides the fact that I say I endorse the drugs. No, I'm kidding. I'm here to say yes to drugs. No, I just wanted to say there's 2 points really quickly that when I made my comment about the fact that, decades ago here in America, one of the victimless crimes, and you could see it in the Loving family, was like getting married to someone of a separate race. Like that's not obviously there's no victim there, but like the point is that this line is arbitrary. Like that changed, right? And so weed is legal in certain states, and so it's clearly an arbitrary line. That's the whole point of victimless crimes. It's like, is you're dealing with this arbitrary situation of when people decide that a society is somehow being harmed by this thing, and at some point they decide, oh, never mind, they're not really being harmed by gays being able to get married or people being able to smoke a joint. The next quick thing I just wanted to say is, when people talk about what about the children, like, what about the children whose fathers are currently in prison for dealing or doing drugs? And if we want to talk about the moral degradation of society, can we point out the fact that right now there's a generation of children who are their fathers are not present because they're in jail for stupid victimless crimes or associated crimes that end up having victims, because for example, the violence around the drug industry wouldn't exist if it was legal. The same way that, mobsters during Prohibition times for alcohol, it was a completely different situation once it became legal. As Jason was saying, you don't see the Anheuser-Busch drive-by shooting the Michelob. It just doesn't happen because now there's a legal thing. And so, all of these people whose lives are destroyed, all these families whose lives are destroyed, and then you see a bunch of kids growing up without fathers. You see, families growing up without people that they need in order to create communities that can take care of each other, that can help each other. And if we, I'm not an advocate of having the state pay for anything, but if the state is going to steal our money and use it to pay for something, then it should be for rehab for those people, not for putting them in jail, making them useless and rendering their children fatherless and motherless.
Please let me add one more thing. For anybody out there, if you've lost a family member or a loved one to drugs, I do feel your pain. When I listen to Lynn, she's lost her son due to drugs in a different way, but I understand you're going through pain, and I'm not diminishing it. But what you see as a solution of keeping it illegal obviously didn't work, because those drugs were illegal when you lost your son to it. When you remove the illegality part, all you're doing is making it so other communities will not have this us versus them with law enforcement. And we can begin to heal and actually not have a confrontational style in the way that we handle our laws. And we can actually address a person's addicts or concerns in a healthy way. Putting handcuffs on somebody and giving them a fear of the police is never a good way to help someone with their addiction.
Absolutely. One of the questions, John was playing devil's advocate before. You're preaching to the converted over here, but my concern is, we have lives at stake right now. We have tens of thousands of people serving life sentences. We have millions of people in prisons all around the world for victimless crimes. What can we do to essentially, get the masses on board with trying to push for these things? Because we need to actually convince a lot of the people out in the general public to care about these issues and take action, because those are the things that policymakers really respond to. Do you have any advice? And this is for the rest of the panel on that.
I guess just another way of saying it is, what are the best arguments to sell what we all believe to skeptics? If there's a skeptic out there, what's the best arguments to convince them?
I can tell you that on Stanford campus, I've met a multitude of people that are in government, and when I sat and talked to them, one of the first things that come to me is, "You did 15 years in prison. You seem normal. Like you're totally normal." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. You just don't know me that well." But like my whole thing is, what we need to do is we need to get the people like Rob and myself and someone who's not white, because I'm an anomaly, because if you're white inside the system, you usually get treated better. The federal system's different. I'm not diminishing Rob's, case scenario, but what it is we need to get people that others can relate to and say that this person is not a bad guy. And one of the things I say is, a lot of times when people got out of prison for selling drugs, they would tell me they just want to move on. They don't want to talk about their convictions. And I'm like, that's the worst thing you can do for everybody else. They're like, why is that? I just want to move forward. I don't want people to hold me back. Because then when those laws come up and they start talking about it, you don't pop up in their head. Now when people are talking and they hear about a Class X sentence and being a heinous offender, a lot of times they think of Jason. They're like, you know what? Jason's not a bad dude. Look what he's going on to do. But I'm not special. You only hear about me because I talk about it. We need the people that are impacted the most to start giving a presentable face and making it relatable to the people who don't understand how the process is working. We need to humanize what is an intellectual issue.
Yeah, I feel like most people, when they hear about Ross's sentence, are shocked. They can't believe it. And it is shocking. That's why we have so many signers on our petition, because it's just about the sentence and how the offense doesn't fit the sentence at all. But I think most people are coming from a place that they want to protect their children. And that's totally, I get it. But the problem is the drug war doesn't work to protect their children. It doesn't work. It's shown to not work. But it does do is create cartels. It creates violence. And there's just like, as they were saying, prohibition did with the mafia. And people said, oh, alcohol's terrible, which it can be. Alcohol can be very deadly. Oh, we'll make it illegal. Well, then they had to pass an amendment to make it legal again because the results were so much worse. And it's exactly like that with any kind of prohibition, including drugs. It's not like, oh, everybody should do drugs. And in fact, Portugal has shown, and I think there's other places as well, that when you do decriminalize it and even legalize it, it helps solve the problem, the drug problem. And so I think we need to look at is what does it work? And also, who benefits from this drug war? Well, from what I can tell, it's a huge money-making machine that feeds into mass incarceration, and for a lot of people, and it shreds our rights, our constitutional rights, and that's a whole other discussion. But maybe if people realized how much that was happening, they would reconsider other ways to deal with drugs and the drug problem.
Arvins, do you have a short list of how to convince a skeptic? Imagine a
yeah.
in here with us saying, no, drugs are bad. What do you say to actually, not just to mock them, like I did earlier by calling them a communist, but what would you say if you were trying to take them with you and convince them?
So what I think is interesting is here in the U.S. we have a very particular way that our government functions, which is that there's the federal government and then there's state by state, and so states are capable of passing laws that violate federal law, but like they were able to pass laws of their own to experiment with things. And so we saw this happen with gay marriage in multiple states, Vermont and then Massachusetts and all these different states started legalizing gay marriage, and suddenly it was a tidal wave and everyone realized, oh, this is fine. And we have a similar thing with weed legalization right now. Is, California legalized medicinal marijuana. This pushed a tidal of more medicinal marijuana states than recreational marijuana in numerous states. And I think that's been actually one of the things that I really love about the American experiment is this American experimentalism, which is this idea that a state can say, you know what, we're going to try this our own way. And then you, like the rest of the country, can see what we're trying and can see that it's actually better to do it this way. And so, one, I think that's been something that I really appreciate about my own country and about what we can do. I live in California. Weed is entirely legal there. It's wonderful. It's great. Like there's lots of problems with the regulatory issues of it, but ultimately, I will never be arrested for smoking a joint. But if I go to Texas, that's a completely different thing. Which is just a very weird thing about this country. But it has that benefit, which means that we've been watching. I actually last year at Friedman, I gave a speech about legalization as like the tidal wave has been coming over on weed legalization in U.S. states. But I mean, there's depending on who you're talking to. The thing is that like when you're making an argument about about how to convince somebody, there are all sorts of different ways. Like one, there's that show the experiment and how it's worked, right? There's telling Ross's story, telling Jason's story, showing, like giving it a human face. Sometimes it helps to show them the cost, the cost difference, to show them Portugal as an example. The thing is to realize that there's people who are going to be appealed to by logic. There are people that are going to be appealed to by human stories, and knowing that that we have all of these resources at our disposal because there's so much information now that shows that we're correct on this issue. But one of the things that I also think is really relevant right now is currently, as I always wonder what you guys in Australia or other countries are thinking about what the hell is going on in America right now, because like we've got the COVID thing, we've got and then we had people burning down a police precinct in Minneapolis, and that was an interesting experience because suddenly the news is talking about police brutality, and it's talking about Black Lives Matter, it's talking about this stuff, and people are talking about like police accountability, and that's just a big issue for me. But that police accountability has a second side of it, which is what are the ways that we can reduce police brutality? And I kind of talked about that. One of those things is ending victimless crimes. And we even can see people on the hard left, talking about this issue, talking about in order to really end police brutality, we need to, have communities policing themselves. But then they also start talking about there's a campaign called the Zero Campaign, I believe, which is talking about solutions that include things like reducing these kinds of petty crime issues. And so it's one of those things where I think that we have a lot of opportunity here with current events and everything else to actually hold hands with unexpected allies. I don't sit around going let's shake the hand of a Black Lives Matter person who literally says they're a Marxist. but there are actually benefits to recognizing when we can have allies on these topics. And it's something that I'm really loving about the Jo Jorgensen and Spike Cohen campaign, is that they are really talking about, hey, you want to end police brutality? Then these are the things you have to do. And they list them off. And one of them is ending victimless crimes, because we can, the time is now, the moment is now to talk about that issue and to really show people that if they want to end this thing that they hate, that they are seeing happen, they are seeing, Freddie Gray and Eric Garner and all these people being murdered by the police. And one of the ways of stopping that is stopping the ways in which police harass people. And the ways that they do that are through these stupid arbitrary regulations of victimless crimes. And so I think that that's a huge spot.
That gives me a really good segue then to do something that I know you've been wanting us to do. And that is to show a video from your good mate, Spike Cohen, who was originally going to be at this conference, couldn't make it, scheduling issue, but he's got a wonderful video called, I think, Unlock Justice or something like that. And we're going to go to that now for the audience at home.
Something has to change. Every day we are witnessing brutality on an unimaginable scale. Every day we are witnessing systemic racism that many of us have been told about but didn't want to believe was real. Every day people are being victimized and we feel powerless. We are filled with anger, fear, rage. But it doesn't have to be this way. The police should make us feel safe, not scared, relieved, not resentful. Now is the time for change, and Jo Jorgensen and I have a plan to bring that change. End qualified immunity. End the militarization of the police. End civil asset forfeiture. End no-knock raids. End the war on drugs. End institutional racism. Make our justice system a system of actual justice. Now, more than ever, is the time to reject and disrupt the status quo. Now is the time to heal. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power.